Now, it's time for Modern Money Doughnuts with Stephen Hale and Gabrielle Bond.
Hello, everybody. A warm welcome from me and my colleague, Gabrielle Bond, to Series 3, Episode 4 of Modern Money Doughnuts, which is a podcast about modern monetary theory and ecological economics, which is being made on the land of the Ghana people. We offer our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. We are fully aware and can't say enough times that we are living on land which is Ghana land, which was never ceded and will always be Ghana land. Gabby, hello.
Good morning. Good morning, listeners and people listening back later. It's great to have you with us. Today, we are going to be talking to one of our fantastic students in the Economics of Sustainability postgraduate course. And we're going to bring in Jackson Winter very shortly. But just before we do, I want to say thank you to KRTD Media for the use of that video. And also thank you to my partner, Alexander Hanish, who plays the music on that video. And you can find lots of his music on YouTube and from his website, which is hanYsz.com.au. So let's bring in Jackson and we'll have a chat about what we're learning in the courses and some really interesting stuff that Jackson's also doing as outside of the study, which he's very active on Twitter, and he's a great writer, and we've been doing a lot of extracurricular sort of writing and thinking about framing and language and communication. So it'd be great to talk to him about that. Welcome, Jackson.
Hello.
Thanks for joining us.
And so
let's start with where you are today.
So I'm in Melbourne now. I believe specifically I'm on Boonwurrung country, and it's a lovely day here.
Yeah, it looks really nice. And you've been to New Zealand recently for work?
Yes, I went to New Zealand late last year for a few weeks, which was right in the middle of the first trimester of the Sustainability of Economics course, which was difficult, very challenging.
Yeah. Balancing work and travel is very hard sometimes, isn't it? And study, of course. So you're working full time, aren't you?
Yes, working full time, and in the first trimester when the course was launched, I thought I'll do 2 subjects a trimester. That would be a part-time load, but that was quite intense, especially with the travel. I think it might be possible. I'm still planning to do that in some future trimesters, but hopefully I can balance the rest of my life a bit more and know what's up. So I'm just doing the 1 subject this time around.
Yeah, I'm not saying anything about professional footballers, but full-time professional footballers gone from 1 to 2 subjects. Not that we're saying they have an easy life or anything. But anyway.
Look, I think what you've achieved is remarkable. You seem to go a million miles an hour. To me, Jackson, I was just thinking, like, before we started this podcast today, I was remembering when I first met you in person, when we came to Rethinking Capitalism, to do Rethinking Capitalism in Williamstown, which is a lovely kind of port city suburb of Melbourne, which has got heaps of history and is a really, really cool place to explore. And I think I remember you came in quite early for the session, and I suggested, you could just go get a coffee for a little while because we're not starting for another hour. And I remember what you said to me. You said, "Oh, I can't drink any more coffee. My brain's going so fast. I just need to sit down and think for a minute or two." So
yeah. I think that was that was roughly early last year.
Yeah.
And I was going through the process of getting diagnosed for ADHD at the time, and I might have even started medication by that point. So I was probably in the midst of a lot of like hormonal brain changes at that time.
Makes
Well, it was
sense.
great. It was great to see you there. And since Gabby's mentioned Melbourne, let's mention that we're coming back to Melbourne. Okay, when are we planning to be in Melbourne doing the weekend intensive, Gabby?
Yeah, so we've just found a little window where we could come to Melbourne, even though we're teaching during the trimester. In the weekend of April the 15th and 16th, we've worked out that we could come down to Melbourne on the train to save the emissions from flying, which is a nice thing to do if we can possibly do it. And we could use potentially the Torrens campus, which is right in the middle of the city opposite Federation Square, and do our Rethinking Capitalism weekend intensive in Melbourne. So if you are in Melbourne and you'd like to come along to that, keep an eye out because we'll be posting up an event for that soon. You can check out our Modern Money Lab website, modernmoneylab.org.au, and then if you go to the events page, you'll see latest events there. Yes, but anyway, we've gone, we're just putting some ads in here, but I would actually really like to ask Jackson about you on Twitter. You can find, Jackson is quite active on Twitter, and you run an account which is called the PEGS Institute, and you do a lot of cool videos about things like preferential voting and various aspects of economics. And I just wanted to ask you, how long ago did you start that, and what was your motivation?
Yeah, sure. Well, yeah, I'll tell the full story of that. So
Yeah, great.
it was essentially it was a COVID lockdown project.
Right.
So I'd heard of MMT probably sometime in late 2019-ish, and then as we were going into all the lockdowns, a close friend of mine, he came across MMT and he said to me, "Have you heard of this thing?" I was like, "Yeah." I didn't really know much about it because actually the conversation that I had with him at the time was I clearly didn't understand what was happening, but he was getting really very intensely interested in it. So me, him, and another friend, we're all sitting around at home with not much to do, so we all just started reading MMT papers and watching MMT lectures. And we got
fantastic.
very invested in that.
Yeah. And this was before Stephanie's book, right?
I think it was maybe like her book had just come out.
Yeah, okay.
There were some before then, I think, because I remember, I don't know whether it was Jackson or one of the other guys that shared one of the early videos with me. They've been some of your videos that people want to look up. PEGS Institute videos on YouTube. There are some really good videos on the basics of modern monetary theory that they've produced, which are very impressive and useful. And at least one occasion, I've used one of them in class.
That's great. That's excellent. Well, the reason we decided to make those was we were watching these. Outside of Stephanie's book, we were finding a lot of the material was not necessarily friendly to total beginners like us, so we thought we can try and condense this down. So the videos are like 4 to 6 minutes long, and they're trying to focus on a specific little point. Like I think the first one we did was what is money, which is trying to explain the credit origins of money. Then we went into taxes, just saying your taxes pay for nothing. So trying to do that in 5 minutes instead of what we were consuming to grasp that information was like, hour-long lectures.
Yeah,
which is fine, and I definitely enjoyed it. But but then that's I mean, we started doing that just as a lockdown project. But honestly, I think that sort of communication, I guess, is I've found like a real passion for that of looking into all of these subjects, trying to understand it myself sufficiently that I can then pass on the information. Because I have a thing I very often do where I'll read something or I'll watch a documentary or something. I'll get really, really excited about it. and I'll start telling everyone, like, have you heard about this? Look at this thing. This is incredible, as if everyone else doesn't already know. And there's a lot of things like that where it's like, no, everyone does know a lot of this stuff. It's just there's a lot of, it's not that we haven't figured this stuff out yet. There's other forces at play. So so that's why I get really excited about that. So we developed that during lockdown, and then we branched out into a couple of other topics as well, like you mentioned, preferential voting, things like that. But yeah, it helped me to not only research all of these topics, try and write it in a sort of accessible way and a concise way as well, which is definitely something. Being brief is not always my strong suit, and then but also doing
it is challenging, isn't it? Yeah. I think I really wish more people understood preferential voting. It would make such a difference to our representation, which is so unfair. When you look at me being a greenie, obviously, if anyone who knows me at all would know that I'm a Greens voter. I think, when you look at the situation where we're in, where a party like the National Party can end up with, seats in the 13, 14, 15 seats.
You might just remember that there are people watching us who are not Australians.
That's true, yes.
They will have no idea what the term preferential voting even means. Sometimes.
Well, that's true. I guess it's a fairer system of voting than first past the post, because you can number the candidates in order of your preference. So if you want a candidate who is not in one of the kind of like the two mainstream, what people would think of the kind of two big left or right parties, you have the opportunity to do that in Australia, because you can put one against an independent person or a party that's not in one of those two majors.
In the UK, this is called single transferable vote.
Yeah.
That's the term for the same thing, basically. Yeah. But yeah, absolutely. And there was a campaign for a long time to move towards something in that direction in the UK, but so far without success.
Yeah.
And similarly in the US, really, as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that really ties into some of the work that we've been doing outside of our lectures in this Economics of Sustainability program about framing and language and how we present ideas, which I'm really interested in. And I know you are, Jackson, because you've been like one of the key organizers of those sessions. And I think like a really good example of that is how we might talk about preferential voting and how the political parties do and don't talk about preferential voting. Because I know Bob Brown, for instance, the leader of the Greens Party, a while back, really tried to do a public education piece around how preferential voting works. And it wasn't as successful as it could have been, because I guess some of the feedback, for better or for worse, was that the Greens Party is not a good messenger to be putting out that message, because they have a lot to gain for more people understanding that, right? And on the opposite side of that coin, the two major parties are never going to invest in anything that tries to kind of put forward the idea of educating people about preferential voting, because they have heaps to lose from people understanding it better. So that's how we've kind of gotten ourselves into this really difficult situation. And yeah, I don't know, it's a wicked problem.
It's a different problem here, and much less of a problem here than it is in places like the UK, for example, where it's actually in Britain a miracle that there's a Greens member of Parliament in the House of Commons. It's almost impossible to imagine that in Brighton they actually won a first past the post election from scratch. It always takes a miracle for that to happen. So we are at least far in advance of many other countries where preferential voting doesn't even exist. Our problem is just people not making use of it. which is a very difficult one. But yeah, sorry.
No, that's absolutely true, and definitely worth acknowledging that we do have a fairer electoral system than many other places. I sort of mentioned that we were doing some work on framing and understanding framing better. Maybe I'll hand over to you, Jackson, for your thoughts on why that's important and what it is that we can maybe achieve as a student group out of that.
Let's just acknowledge that Marcus is with us as well.
Oh,
He's
okay.
one of our students.
Watching online.
Well done, Marcus. We're always amazed people manage to turn up live when we don't warn people in advance. But great to see you.
Well, framing on the subject of elections, I remember an example. There was a state election. I think it was the state election late last year, where the Conservative Party, the Liberals, ran an ad that was it was like depicting someone waking up from a hangover and going, "Oh God, what have I done?" And they look at the newspaper headline and it says Labour win in landslide, and they go, "Oh no, it's a Labour hangover." And I was looking at that like, what are you doing? Do you know anything at all? You've just put a headline, Labour win. You've just manifested that into reality, and that's what happened.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a classic, isn't it?
It's really interesting to look at the framing of things like that, and like they have a point to make there, but they framed it in a way that's like, you've made that too real, and I mean, it was going that way anyway. That wasn't the deciding factor, but yeah, it's really interesting to we've been having a few discussions around not just messaging, but more broadly. Like I think you talked to Susan previously, and she's been trying to get us to make like metaphors of these things for ourselves, not just to how we communicate it to others, but also how we understand these things.
Yeah.
Which I think is a really good starting point to challenge ourselves and say, you know, we might understand all of these technicalities, but you know, trying to bridge the gap and put ourselves in someone else's shoes first, I guess.
Yeah. So the metaphors that we thought about when we're talking about the economy, and you know, metaphors can be helpful or unhelpful, or a kind of a combination of both. But I think the two that we were talking about as potentially the most helpful is thinking about not the economy as a natural phenomenon that we're all subject to and that we have no control over, but rather as something like a ship that we're sailing, and we can pull on various levers and change the course of the ship if we want to. And sometimes it's helpful to think about it as a huge ocean liner that takes forever to turn, but you just have to pull the wheel gradually. And in other situations it might be more helpful to think of the ship as a sailing ship, where the winds having an effect on how we make progress or don't, and we're subject to storms and natural disasters and those things that can be helpful. And then the other one we talked about was the economy in terms of perhaps a farm, where you need to take into account of the seasons, and you need to plant things that are going to grow well together and that are right for the climate, and you need to tend them, and you need actually quite a lot of people working in different roles if it's going to be a productive farm, and you need to care for the land as you're doing it, otherwise you won't be able to have your farm in 10 years' time. So those metaphors can be helpful.
Marcus just said, as long as we avoid Titanic references.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well,
although we are heading towards the iceberg.
Exactly. I think Titanic references are quite apt.
And some of the people in charge of the ship are saying, no, you can't turn the direction of the ship too much.
Because it will affect rich people's yacht money.
That's right. We have to keep going.
There's a part of that, like before I was after doing all of that PEG stuff during lockdowns, and once we came out, then I decided I really like this research stuff, so I'm going to go back to uni. So I was studying politics, philosophy, and economics. And one of the things I was studying in politics, I was really interested in why, because I'm in Melbourne, which at some point was the most locked down city in the world. And I was trying to understand why actually most people were fine with that. And if it didn't have the context of the pandemic, that's something completely bizarre that, you know, you'd say your state premier told you have to stay in your house 23 hours a day and you can't go more than 5 kilometers. That seems like really oppressive, but actually most people were fine with it. So I was trying to figure out why that happened. And the thing I basically arrived at after studying that for a while was there's just like an element of control, like there's this scary beast of the pandemic and someone's in control of that. And as long as someone's steering the ship, to go back to that metaphor, then we're all comfortable. And I think it's actually really important in terms of the climate and economic stuff that, someone is steering the ship, but like, are we just all going to sit here as a passenger? Like, we can contribute to the ship as well.
Absolutely.
And we can be involved.
Yeah. So then the metaphor of the kind of sailing ship where everybody has a role, and if you're part of the crew, you know, you need to work together and all of those helpful things. Yeah, absolutely. That's interesting. Your reflections on lockdown. I think it was complex. Yeah, absolutely. And in Adelaide, we didn't have anything like the experience of what Melbourne did. And obviously, you know, some people really struggled, and some it would have made a lot of people's lives a lot worse. But like you said, there was definitely not for everybody, but there was the upside of making us kind of more appreciative of our neighborhoods and the people that we live close to, and the little joys of, you know, discovering stuff in your local area. Plus the whole the online world really opened up to people as well, if that's something that they could access. And like, I seriously think that we wouldn't have been able to do this course without having gone through the experience of COVID, because it proved to everybody that we can make a community even though we're only interacting online, and we can collaborate well, and we can, you know, find solutions. And that's actually meant that we can have people from everywhere in the world, and it can really make it a lot more diverse and interesting.
I mean, you mentioned Susan. We could have been, never mind Adelaide, if we'd been running this course in Melbourne or Sydney, we wouldn't have been able to attract people like that to actually come and participate. So there are, in lots of ways, this is much better than we could have done face-to-face. You just can't get this bunch of personalities from all different backgrounds to interact. I agree. As on the COVID thing, I think there was the imminent threat of possible severe illness or death, and the fact that you had personal control over it. And you've reminded me of the late Sean Locke, the English comedian, when talking about ecological breakdown and changing our lifestyle, saying after he visited the US, actually, although I don't want to go on about the US because Australia is just as bad, that when he got home, doing things like recycling, it felt like turning up to an earthquake with a dustpan and brush.
Yeah. It
just felt there's nothing I can do. That's something we have to guard against, because there are things that we can all do. It's just that it's not obvious how what we're doing will work, and it's the collective actions of so many people rather than individual actions.
I think I definitely feel that as well. It's really easy to get, sometimes if you have like a choice between, oh, this thing's a bit easier or nicer, but it's less eco-friendly or whatever. And the thing that I always try to keep in mind with that is, I came to this after talking to I went to like a protest last year or a couple of years ago, and I was talking to, there was a group of socialists there trying to recruit everyone basically, and I was talking to them about it, and I was saying, look, the world is going to change one day, sooner or later, and it might not be us that changes it, but also it might be. We don't know, and if it's not us, then we've got to like keep the flame alive. We've got to, you know, carry the torch and make the space for whoever is going to be the world changer to take over and carry that torch. And so for even that, I feel like that applies even stuff like just recycling, you know, cardboard or whatever. Like it's not nothing. It's very small relative to some of the bigger things, but you know, it's important to carry the torch and keep it going. And it might be you that makes the big difference.
That's right. Absolutely.
You reminded me of something else. We had the late Jeff Harcourt, who is in the top 2 of the most famous Australian economists in history, at our conference at the beginning of 2020. And he said something along the lines of, just remember, it took 6 people meeting to lead to the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia. You just don't know what the consequences of anything you're doing now might be. Marcus has said some interesting things in the comments as well. What he said, one thing about lockdowns definitively demonstrated the power of the state if it's willing to use that power. Funny how we're constantly told markets reign supreme when it's patently not true. And I've seen Kate Raworth say that, something along those lines as well, that one of the things that the pandemic showed is that if governments actually decide to do something, they can change everything more or less overnight. And of course,
I think that's
go ahead.
So true. Like that's what blows my mind a bit at the moment, is we had all of that very heavy control, and then at some point everyone just decided that's done with now. Like going to New Zealand and they've given up on most restrictions and stuff, and same here and everywhere else. And it's very interesting. And I've seen a lot. I've seen a lot of Bill Mitchell talking about the Central Bank of Japan and their control relative to other central banks, and you know, they know who has the power essentially.
Yeah, it's a really interesting case study, isn't it? Yeah.
So yeah, it's absolutely like we know that they can make a big difference when they want to, but they're just choosing not to.
And sometimes when emergencies happen, when they're obvious to everybody, then they do make a big difference. And when there is a terrible cyclone in New Zealand, nobody says, let's wait for the free market to come and sort everything out. There's only one institution that can provide leadership under those circumstances, which is it is the currency issuing central government. And we seem to either forget that, or we let people minimize the potential role of government at other times. Then until the next disaster comes along, and then the government comes back in and rescues everything again.
Yeah.
Well, on that, I'm really excited. So the subject that I'm taking this trimester is ecological economics, and the first paper that I've read for it is Herman Daley from about 92, I think it was. Mm-hmm. He's talking about pollution trading allowances, and trying not to have too much government intervention in the market, and I'm finding that extremely interesting, partially because I feel like I disagree with it, so I'm really keen.
1992. That's 30 years ago.
Yeah.
I was just thinking that's the year I finished high school. Oh my goodness.
Herman Daley had 1 foot or half a foot in neoclassical economics. And that's where I think that's one of the things that Phil is struggling with, trying to take Herman Daley's insights And as far as ecological economics is concerned, Herman Daley is Warren Mosler, Bill Mitchell, Stephanie Kelton, and Randall Ray all wrapped into one. Really, he's iconic, and Phil hugely respects his work. And it was a great privilege to talk to Herman before our conference three years ago. It's very sad that he's passed on now, but that's one of the things Phil is trying to do as he teaches this course, is to meld together ecological economics with some of the insights coming from MMT as well. And Phil is coming at it from an ecological economics perspective. Stephanie Kelton is coming at these same ideas from an MMT perspective. And what we're trying to do is to meet them somewhere in the middle. Nobody's done that yet. That's why it's so important that we're successful and that we keep this going and keep building, because it's just such an important thing to be doing, and nobody else is doing it at the moment except Jackson and Jackson's fellow students, including Marcus.
Yeah, that's right. And I think like one of the things I remember really, really clearly from when I was learning some activism and organizing skills through GetUp is, like, you think about 3 areas where people try to make change. You know, there's individual actions, which, like you said, Jackson, you know, recycling and trying to reduce your own carbon emissions. Then there's building better alternatives, which could be something like permaculture or, you know, electric bikes and community banking and those sorts of things. So you've got like an alternative to something that's harmful. And then the hardest and most, but also the one with the best payoffs, if you do actually win, is changing dominant institutions. And that's what we're trying to do with the whole economics school, is to change something that's dominant and, you know, present something new. So it is really tough. I hope my video didn't drop out too much there. I can see myself freezing, so apologies for that if it's happening. Oh, you're on mute, sorry.
Yeah, you were fine.
That's good.
That's really, the institutions thing, like I was saying before, like it might be us that makes the difference. And for the institutions, I mean, from what I see of the status quo of institutions, is a feeling of like, it is what it is. That's just the way things are. You know, it's the Margaret Thatcher thing. There is no alternative. Like, and the stuff that we've learned already is. It wasn't always like that. So if it wasn't like that in the past, it doesn't have to be like that in the future.
Do you know, we've made little differences already. For example, Gareth Hutchins of the ABC has been writing about Lachlan McCall's paper recently about other ways of managing inflation than relying on changes in interest rates. Now, Lachlan is a supporter of ours. Lachlan came to one of our events in Canberra a few years ago. That's how one thing leads on to another. We had, what's the name of the academic who did that big talk that was on ABC Radio National? And she talked about the job guarantee.
Shireen Morris, fantastic.
Shireen Morris came to the weekend intensive that you came to in Melbourne. She came to the Sydney one.
She's also worked with Bill Mitchell and Noel Pearson. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, and so all sorts of ways. Gabby has had some influence via the Greens on the Greens job guarantee, as had Marcus, who has been writing on the side here. Marcus wrote an article in the Green magazine about a job guarantee, and that was before the Greens had anything along the lines of a job guarantee in their policy platform. So you just keep pushing in all directions, and you never know when you're going to talk to someone who is going to turn up as an elected MP in a year's time. And
That's so true.
And as I have heard recently, probably I shouldn't say this, but fling the deficit myth, the finance minister in a meeting. You just never know when you're going to be creating in some party room meeting a bit of friction by introducing an idea that wasn't there before, and what the final outcome of all that's going to be.
I think there was a motto you gave us in the Rethinking Capitalism weekend, which was persist until something happens.
I stole that. It persist until something happens. Yes, push. That was used in South Africa by an AIDS campaigner when the president at the time, whose name I forget, but the person that succeeded Nelson Mandela, was not a believer in HIV and AIDS. And South Africa was very slow to act. And this very brave woman was campaigning for the government to start protecting people. And that was, she said she wasn't getting anywhere, but her motto was push, persist until something happens. And years later, I stole it off her. That's where that came from. Absolutely. That's exactly what we've been doing for years. And we're just going to keep doing, because history is moving, unfortunately, in our direction, if we're talking about ecological change anyway. And history is slowly and in a sort of cyclical way moving in our direction on the MMT front as well, because decisions that are being taken at the moment are going to have very adverse consequences over the next year or year and a half. And when that happens yet again, because it's not the first time we've been through this path, MMT will be back on the front pages again. And because, as happened in the 90s with the Clinton surpluses and in the run up to the GFC and in the Eurozone crisis, it's basically right. It doesn't tell you precisely what to do, but it's basically right. And it can sometimes tell you what it would be a very bad idea to do. And unfortunately, some of our policymakers are doing some very bad things at the moment.
Well, persist until something happens. I think that's probably a good note to end on. It'd be nice to keep going, but I have to be on a tutorial actually very soon on macroeconomics. So,
and I've got to go and get my COVID booster. you anti-vax. If there's any anti-vaxxers out there, I'm off to get my COVID booster as soon as I'm entitled to.
But it is really lovely to talk to you, Jackson. And I don't know if you know this, but not only were you the first person to arrive for our Rethinking Capitalism workshop in Melbourne, but you were actually the first person to make an inquiry when we had a Google form online that people could fill in and ask us about the degree. And you were the #1 response on that Google form. So every time I bring up my spreadsheet with all of our students or all of the people who are ever interested in, your name's there, #1. So it's terrific.
But like Stephen, you announced the course at the end of the weekend. And then I came and chatted to you about it. And then from that point on, I was like, I'm 100% in. So day one that was available, I was straight on board.
Thank you.
That's marvelous. Thanks very much. And let me also thank Marcus, who is now Jackson's fellow student on the program, because Marcus is in his first week. And also Danny Wyndham, who I thank you very much. It's amazing you've tracked us down, because we don't advertise this live, but thanks very much for listening. And they mentioned Stephanie Kelton and Steve Keen, so I'm going to thank Steve Keen for doing guest lectures, Stephanie Kelton likewise, Fadel Kaboub likewise, and the amazing people who've agreed to teach subjects for us: John T. Harvey, the cowboy economist, Dirk Entz, Scott Fulwiler, who did his first live class a couple of hours ago for us. Of course, Philip Lawn, Colleen Schneider, an ecological economist from Vienna, is an amazing woman. Sanada Nukic, our econometrician, another amazing woman. David Joy, and who have I missed out, Gabby? I must have missed somebody.
Eric Dean is
Eric
coming.
Dean,
Yep.
our super cool UMKC trained real world microeconomist as well. I am confident for a course like this, we have easily the best team of teachers in the world. So if you are thinking about doing something like this, we would love to have you on the project. The sooner we get even more students, the sooner we can start doing what we would really like to do, which is to have a scholarship program for people from the global south and to fund research opportunities for young researchers, because as far as academia is concerned, in our leading universities, the gatekeepers of knowledge jealously guard economics departments and really don't hire many ecological economists or any MMT economists. So we have to create our own opportunities for what is important research and for going out there and spreading the word as far as people is concerned, and spreading things that people like Bill Mitchell and Warren Mosler and Herman Daley and Stephanie Kelton and others have developed, because the economics of the 20th century is leading us to drive this ship towards the iceberg at the moment, and we have to get other people to pull the policy levers and steer us into calm waters while there's still time.
Yes, great note to end on. Thank you. I'll end the live broadcast in a minute, but thank you so much, Jackson, for joining us today. It was great to talk to you, and thanks, Stephen, for coming on as ever. And we will see you next week for another episode of Modern Money Doughnuts, where we meet another one of our amazing students. And I hope you're enjoying the series, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, everyone.